Hello, good afternoon. This is Adam Palmer, the Director of International Government Affairs at FireEye, and I want to welcome everybody who's joined for this presentation about European cybersecurity policy. It's my pleasure to be talking to all of you. I'm based in Munich, Germany, and I manage European cybersecurity policy for FireEye, both in Europe and for Asia as well. So I have a broad perspective across a number of different countries and regions around the world on cybersecurity, but today we're going to be focused on Europe, and we're going to be talking about the Network Information Security Directive, which I will be referring to as the NIS Directive. And before I begin, I just want to make a general comment about cybersecurity policy. I'm often asked to go and talk to some of our customers or even to talk with government groups about cybersecurity policy. And one of the important points I try to make is that the conversation about cybersecurity, I think, really should not start with technology. And that may sound like a strange comment from a person who works at a cybersecurity vendor, but I think that before you know what technology you're going to focus on, you have to have a strategy and you have to have a plan. And part of that is policy. I say part because compliance is not good security. Right? Compliance is generally the minimum security standard that you have to meet, but it's not real security. So, we're going to be talking though about some of the policy and strategy that's occurring in the EU, because it's still important. You still want to know what are the requirements, what will be some of the legal and regulatory requirements that I have to meet to keep my company in compliance and to keep my business safe. And the other comment I'll make about policy before we begin is I think it really can be a starting point for answering some fundamental questions. And I think three of those questions are, what am I doing? What is it that I need to accomplish? Why am I doing certain activities, either to implement security or to meet compliance standards? And how or what time frame do I need to implement them in? So all of those questions really start with policy. And it's like building a house. Without a good foundation, you're never going to build anything solid. So policy can be the foundation for your security house. So with that beginning, let's talk a little bit about steps to prepare for the European Network Information Security Directive. I'll just wait for our screen to advance here a second. What I will be talking about again, the NIS is not completely finalized. We expect that it will be finalized by the European government probably in August, and I'll talk about what that means, but it's been largely agreed upon. It's been voted on by the European Parliament. So there's essentially what we'll be talking about today will not change in the next 2 months, barring any very unforeseen circumstance. So you can expect that all this will begin and the clock will run for compliance starting roughly in August. And what is the Network Information Security Directive? We'll be discussing what it is, why you should care about it, what are some of the requirements, and what you should think about doing next. And the NIS is the cybersecurity policy now for the European Union. Every member state and a certain group of companies, we'll talk about who it applies to, has to be in compliance with the NIS directive. And now some of you in the news in the last month or two have probably heard there's actually been more attention given to another policy called the GDPR. And if we're talking about security policy, these are two of the main policies that you need to think about. But the GDPR stands for General Data Privacy Regulation. The GDPR is actually more of a privacy-focused regulation. And in fact, some of the parts of the NIS directive are duplicated inside the GDPR, but its focus is really on data privacy. And the NIS directive is really the cybersecurity policy for the EU. So they really have to be taken together to fully understand what your compliance and security requirements are for Europe. But again, just to understand the difference between the two and what the focus of each one is. The NIS is focused on security standards and controls, whereas the GDPR is focused on data privacy regulation. So, and just as a note as well, for those of you who may not be as familiar with European policy, you probably noticed that both of the GDPR and the NIS, one I refer to as a regulation and the other I refer to as a directive. And just for clarification on that, so a regulation normally becomes almost immediately effective with a grace period, maybe could be 6 months to a year. In terms of a directive, so the NIS is a directive, and it is what it sounds like. It directs the member states, each country, to adopt a law or policy in compliance with the NIS directive. So we'll talk about how that occurs, but it means that each country, France, Germany, UK, every member state will have a certain amount of time to adopt a policy in compliance with the NIS directive. And those can be slightly different. Hopefully they're harmonized. And the goal of this, as background for the NIS, for those of you very new to it, is that this has been a discussion for over 3 years within the European government and across Europe. And the goal was to create a harmonized, uniform policy with strong security standards across Europe. So the goal is to have a harmonized standard across Europe through the NIS directive. So what does the NIS look like? Let's get down to a little bit of substantive examination of what the NIS really requires and what it looks like. It really has 3 main parts, and maybe those could even be thought of as 2 major divisions. One group of requirements really applies to member states at the country level, and those are things like requiring that the member states have a computer incident response team, have a national security strategy, designate a competent authority for coordination of security and data breach reporting, and creating single points of contact for data breach reporting and security incidents. So some of this is a coordination system, and these are things that the member states are at varying degrees of preparedness and compliance so far. So actually some countries like Germany have just in the last 6 to 8 months adopted a new IT security law, which will be in compliance with the NIS directive, and they're working on refining that, but have already gotten out in front of and adopting this. Other countries will have a little more gap in developing their national strategy and making sure that they have a cert and effective frameworks within the country. The other piece of this that you need to consider beyond the national, what's required of the national governments, is what's required of private companies. So there's some different requirements that relate to risk management controls, mandatory breach reporting. There's sanctions within the NIS for failure to comply with the due diligence requirements. There's audit requirements, and there's fines for failure to comply. And I'm going to make some points about some of these. It's really the punishments, the penalties within the NIS are not for having a breach. They're not designed to penalize you if you're the victim of a cyber crime or a cyber attack. These are incentive controls designed if you're negligent in failing to set appropriate security standards or risk management. So these are risk management controls, not, I want to make it absolutely clear, they're not penalties designed to punish a company for having a data breach. And we'll also talk about the fines and how those also relate back to the GDPR as well. So one thing that's also important to note about the NIS is it is not a critical national infrastructure directive, a CNI directive. The NIS actually applies to a group of what are termed as essential services. And again, it applies to every EU member state and really a wide range of what were designated as operators of essential services in certain critical sectors. The critical sectors that were identified were energy, transport, banking, financial services companies, so ones that may not necessarily be a banking company, but providing financial market information or services, healthcare, and certain other distinct industries that can be designated by states as member states as critical essential services. It also applies to some digital services providers. For purposes of today, I'm not going to speak to that at length because those actually have lighter standards. And there's also some language in the NIS Directive that if you're a telecom provider and you're already regulated under fairly strict requirements, that this does not duplicate that. So it's not designed to replace some of the telecom regulations. It's designed to rather be new requirements for companies that otherwise would not have some of those regulatory requirements. So as I always mentioned, there was an informal agreement reached I think that should say December 2015. It was reached in the European Parliament and voted on agreement for the NIS. Actually, you can show these slides are slightly outdated now. We were hoping for a final vote to approve in April, May. Again, now this is going to be about, we're predicting in August. And then the clock starts to run. The clock will actually be 21 months to implement this. So 21 months for the requirements to be implemented by each company that is within scope and each member country that would have to, or every member state to have some of those requirements that I already discussed. So just to keep moving here. So again, the purpose of the NIS is to harmonize the approach to cybersecurity across the European Union. It applies to essential services providers. One of the key elements is, again, that each member state has to have a national NIS strategy that defines its objectives and really gives concrete implementation standards for this. So by the way, the clock for this, for member states to do this, is set at 6 months. So over the next 6 months, each member state will be defining what are the essential services providers within their market. Certainly, if you're within some of these areas, like energy, healthcare, banking, it's easily assumed and clear that you are within scope of the NIS. If there's some uncertainty over the next 6 months, each member state will be clarifying that within their own national laws and designating who are essential services providers within their country within each of these categories. So let's talk a little bit about some of the specific requirements, and I'm certainly not covering everything, but I wanted to cover some of the core requirements that you may be concerned about. So I've already covered what some of the member state requirements are, but the two things that are really key for private companies to be concerned about are data breach reporting, incident reporting, and what are the standards for security. And I think setting the standards was important. And I'll talk about that just for a second. So there was a lot of debate during the discussions about the NIS Directive as to what was the appropriate standards and how flexible to make those standards. Some countries like the UK have done a great job in programs like the UK Cyber Essentials program. But these were also, there was some concern that maybe the bar was set too low with some of these standards. And, they're great starting points, but certainly they're not comprehensive security standards. And I think that a lot of our customers have always asked for clarity as to what are their requirements. These can be very ambiguous. So the requirements were set actually very high, I think, or at least at a very strong standard. The actual language in the NIS Directive regards to standards you see on the right part of that slide is state-of-the-art security. And this is the same language that's been adopted in the new German IT security law, calling for state-of-the-art security. And basically security that, and again quoting from the NIS Directive directly, guarantees a level of risk or a level of security appropriate to the risk. So this is a fairly high standard, really stating that this is above the minimum essential basic type security protocols, but this is really looking for what will be considered state-of-the-art. And I'll try to give you some examples of other countries that have a little more clearly defined what state-of-the-art security is. The other part that is probably important to everyone on this call is data breach reporting. So there's now mandatory data breach reporting. A notification of an incident under the NIS Directive must be made to authorities without undue delay. And sometimes I've gotten questions about how governments might interpret what an incident is, or to what degree they will require a company to be aware of an incident. And to be aware of an incident really requires visibility into your network. And my only comment to this is certainly there's some ambiguity here and a bit of gray zone, but I think that clearly if you look at the requirement being state-of-the-art, and guaranteeing a level of security appropriate to the risk, that these are probably requirements that are really looking forward towards visibility in your network and having tools that allow you to detect an incident. So if it's an incident that could have easily been detected with some state-of-the-art security measures or some of the modern security tools available, I think you may have a hard time making an argument that you're not in violation of the NIS Directive. And of course, that could subject you to a fine. So, I think the key is, yes, there's some ambiguity about what an incident might be or how high you have to go to detect an incident, but the state of the art has really been set pretty high. So consider that and making every effort you can to have visibility in your network and be able to detect a data breach. And you're also required to report that without undue delay. So again, it's having the capability to detect the incident and then reporting it quickly to authorities. An undue delay is defined within the NIS Directive as normally within 24 to 72 hours after the data breach has been discovered, unless there's some extenuating circumstance or unusual circumstance that you can cite to for why that wasn't followed. So again, what is an incident? And an incident is defined within the NIS Directive, and you kind of have to go through this roughly this analysis of when is something rise to the level of an incident. And of course, you don't want a data breach to rise to the level of an incident. Hopefully, you're detecting things quickly and early in your system, and you're able to prevent a data breach from becoming a data incident, right, or a security incident if you detect it early and resolve it quickly. But if you don't have good detection or you're not resolving it quickly and it becomes an incident, you have to look at the number of users that were affected by the disruption of your services, how long the incident occurred, and the geographical spread of the area affected by the breach. So this gets back to just emphasizing, if you have state-of-the-art controls, if you have state-of-the-art security being applied, and you detect it early, so you limit the duration of the incident, you limit the number of people affected, and you limit the scope, you may not have a reporting requirement. You may be able to contain that, keep it as a security attack, but avoid it from becoming a security incident. But the only way to know if there's been a data breach, and the only way to know whether or not you need to report this, the scope of it, is having visibility of your network. So getting back to the point of the NIS being, this is really a risk management controls-based directive. So what are the penalties? So what happens if something goes wrong? So the penalties are, and quoting from the NIS Directive, the penalties are designed, there's basically set to be, quote, effective, proportionate, and dissuasive. And there are audit capabilities. National governments can audit to determine whether a private company is in compliance with the NIS Directive. And it sets the fines for failure to comply with the NIS Directive provisions at up to 10 million euros or 2% of a company's annual revenue. So again, not directly related to if you've had a security breach, but if the breach could have been prevented by your exercising or implementing appropriate state-of-the-art security controls, or having failed to report the incident in a timely manner. And I mentioned about the GDPR. So the GDPR also provides some sanctions, and those are even higher. It also has the same mandatory data breach reporting requirements, roughly, but it actually doubles the penalties, so up to 20 million euros or 4% of revenue for non-compliance related to data breach reporting. So I've mentioned this before, but I think it's important. We want to know, again, policy helps us answer how we do something and why, what is the time frame for which to do it. And there are 21 months in the NIS Directive with which to implement it, and 6 months within which, over the next 6 months, starting probably in August, within which national governments will be identifying operators of essential services and clarifying who this applies to. 21 months may or may not seem like a long time to you. I would urge that I think that the governments will be seeking to make a stake in enforcing this and will not look favorably on companies that are, say, slow or not in compliance, even if there's a slight grace period, as sometimes there typically is for compliance. I still think you're risking a dangerous zone with some significant penalties if you fail to at least start to implement this now. And one of the good things about the NIS is sometimes companies have operations in a number of different countries. I don't know any standard that is higher than the NIS Directive right now in any of the regions I work with in the U.S. or within the Middle East. All of them might have slightly different requirements, but implementing state-of-the-art security is pretty high. So if you comply with NIS, chances are very likely that you're in compliance with some of the other standards in the regions that you want to operate in as well. So what should you really be doing to get ready for NIS? How do you prepare for this? How do you get your board prepared and your company prepared for the NIS Directive? So it's doing a review of your security program, and could you, if an auditor, if a regulator contacted you, and up to 2% or 4% of your total revenue was at risk, could you defend that you have state-of-the-art security implemented? Do you have a clear awareness of what state-of-the-art security is, and are you applying it? How are you really protected? Do you have visibility of your network to understand the potential impact of a data breach? Could you prevent a security data breach from becoming a security incident, where that really will save you the money, right? Beyond the embarrassment or PR embarrassment of this, could you really be able to prevent something by quick action from becoming a security incident? Do you have the visibility of your network to be able to comply with NIS and report a breach? So this all goes to how long does it take you to detect it? How long does it take you to contain an incident? And what do you know about the attackers, right? Are you able to convey information to the public or to regulators clearly about who might have attacked you? And what's your remediation plan? So to summarize, I think the NIS Directive is really a good time, and really a time you're required by policy to review your security program and really look at how strong of a security program do you have. And I will urge you, and I'll try to give some support for this, that prevention is not enough. Commonly that we work with companies where the focus is really on data breach prevention, when if you've kind of been following the discussion so far for the last few minutes on NIS is really focused on detection. And that's because detection is really the state-of-the-art security. And in fact, the slide I'm showing you cites a Gartner study that by 2020, Gartner expects about 60% of commercial security budgets are going to be allocated for rapid detection and response capabilities. So I think we're really seeing a shift on what is state-of-the-art security. If you're still focused on prevention, I would emphasize that this is kind of the 3,000-year-old strategy approach to security. This is building the castle wall higher. But if there's one basic truth, it's that the castle wall is going to be breached. You can never build it high enough. You can never train your staff well enough. There's always going to be humans making mistakes or clicking on a link. You'll never train everybody in your organization to be security proof, and you'll never build the wall high enough to be able to prevent a security breach, because there may always be some 0-day, some unknown threat, some sophisticated attack that's going to get through your castle wall. So this is why, and this is what Gartner is recognizing, that prevention is not enough. It has to be focused on detection and rapid response. And this is not just FireEye talking. This is really backed up by the emphasis of the NIS Directive and its emphasis on rapid detection and response. So as you're planning your security program, I think one of the things to think about is, where do you fall? So actually prevention these are sort of the 3 stages of an advanced security program. And actually stage 1 isn't even on the screen that you're looking at. That's really stage 1 is prevention. So if you're only focused on building a castle wall stronger and higher, you're not even really at stage 1, which we view as stage 1 as detection of threats, where you're actively, you have implemented security programs that are actively detecting threats on your network. Stage 2 is response. How quickly do you respond to that? Does it take you a minute or 10 minutes or 100 days? What is, and the average time right now is close to 200 days still remains for some companies to detect a data breach. So really closing that gap, getting this down to minutes instead of hours, or days or months, whatever it may be. And then finally, hunting is really what we consider state-of-the-art and the most sophisticated form of security. When you have an active cyber defense center within your organization, and instead of passively waiting for a security threat notification from some technology, that you're actively hunting on your network for anomalies. You're actively looking for incident activity that is suspicious, so that you could detect threats as quickly as possible. So I wanted to talk about what is state-of-the-art security, and I've kind of talked about that it is an active cyber defense system, and it's actively hunting for cyber threats on your network. And these are three just quick notes on organizations and countries that have kind of defined what state-of-the-art security is. The U.S. Quote that I have there is actually taken from the NIST, the NIST standards within the United States that call for information systems that essentially are more than antivirus. They don't use signature-based detection. They're capable of detecting unknown threats. The Australian Signals Directorate, the ASD, has gone even further. About 2 years ago, they released within their top 25 security controls a quote that said, automated dynamic analysis of email and web content run through a sandbox, detecting suspicious behavior, and looking for new or modified files or configuration changes. So again, very similar to the US, saying you've got to go beyond just updating your patches and having basic antivirus, but really having an active automated detection capability that can detect unknown threats. Same thing with the Global Cybersecurity Council that I want to include there. Just wanted to, and I think this is the trend. We're seeing more and more governments that I think are defining this and encouraging this as defining state-of-the-art security. So what's the future? What is next? What will happen in 2017? So I think finalizing this here, it should say fall now. You see, this was hopeful when I created these slides a short time ago. We thought maybe about this month or two it would be finished, but actually we're looking at August now, and the clock will start. The 21-month clock will start. I think we'll see refining of terms like state-of-the-art across the EU and different government standards, like we're seeing in Germany has a group working right now on refining some of the terms in its new IT security law. And I think you'll continue to see these terms defined and more member states really defining a high standard for state-of-the-art security. I don't think that we'll see a new EU security policy probably for a couple of years, but I think that if there's any modifications in the near future, it's that it will expand the scope of companies to which this applies, probably to all public companies. There was discussion during the NIS debates about applying this to a broader scope of companies. I think that for the time being they wanted to start small, but I think there's strong feelings about that this should apply to a wider group of companies. So even if you're not included within the scope of the NIS now, I would suggest that it's not a bad idea to do so, just in anticipation that your security program will be required in the near future to meet the NIS Directive requirements. And finally, I think that you'll start, and we already are seeing European government activity related to public-private partnership, PPP, and data sharing requirements being considered and reevaluated. So I think that will be the next hot topics for European governments on cybersecurity over the next year. So I want to finish by closing out. This has been a kind of a high level, but to say I think that the keys for you to takeaways from what to do to prepare for the NIS Directive is implementing state-of-the-art security into your security program, being sure that you have an incident response readiness program that has visibility into your network so that you can respond in a quick and knowledgeable way to security incidents, adopting your own internal security and response strategy, and begin planning now. Don't wait till month 20 to discover that you need to have vastly improved security within your plan. And I also want to note to this that I am happy to talk. I do talk frequently one-to-one with some of our customers, and I spend a great deal of time in Brussels and across, again, even outside of Europe with other governments. So if you have questions about compliance with the NIS or really anything about designing your security strategy or compliance with government regulation, I'm happy to talk to you, happy to discuss this with you. And we're trying to also work on producing some materials soon that will help you maybe in better understanding your compliance requirements and designing your program. I know sometimes you can feel like maybe you're in the IT section or the CIO section of your company and you think this is really kind of legal stuff, but at the same time, I think that this is a hat, unfortunately, for better or worse, that everybody needs to wear, and you really need to be aware of what these requirements are. And I haven't met a lot of in-house counsel or in-house legal staff that seems to be following security protocols and controls closely. So, this is something definitely to consult with those people, and they certainly have a huge role in helping you with support your security program. But if you have a in-house risk management group that maybe isn't closely following cybersecurity regulation, this is something you can bring to their attention and maybe work on with them. And again, I'm happy to have a one-on-one call with you and your team. And by the way, also there's an article I'd be happy to provide you both on designing an adaptive security program, state-of-the-art security program, and we also have another article that was recently published that I'd be happy to share with you on how to work with your in-house counsel and designing a risk management program. So that was a summary of the highlights of the NIS Directive. I covered that in about 30 minutes, and of course could go into detail on everything, but I hope that gives you a broad overview about what the requirements are and the importance of starting now and planning to prepare for the NIS. So now I will stop and I'll just ask if there are any questions from anybody who's on the call who'd like to ask a question or suggest something. Okay, I haven't received any questions yet, so I will just also ask you to refer that there is a link in the presentation for an area where you can provide feedback on this, and also we have some attachments that you can download that are materials. Again, some of the documents that I noted, and also my direct email. If you want to email me directly, I'll offer it to you as adam.palmer@fireeye.com. Feel free to email me directly, again, adam.palmer@fireeye.com. I'm based in Munich, Germany. And again, you can download some of via the links from this presentation, you can download some of the documents that will help you. They're completely free in designing your security program or more information about the NIS Directive. I can also provide you a copy of the slides. I'd be happy to provide that to you along with any of the materials that might be helpful to you. Okay, we don't have any other questions yet, so I think then I will end the presentation and thank you everybody for joining. Oh, sorry, we have one more question just came in, and it was again asking. I'm just reading through the question here really quick. It's asking about how can you comply with all of the different regulations, and is this on top of some of the other regulations that you might be required? This is one of the issues that I think that governments are still struggling with, that you may have other reporting requirements in your individual country. The security laws are certainly not completely harmonized as of yet, but going back to one of my points earlier is that the NIS Directive does set a fairly high reporting requirement or security standard. So if you're complying with that, I think that you run a high chance that you're compliant with other standards, but they haven't fully resolved the chance that you might have various other reporting requirements that you would have to, or reporting requirements you'd have to comply with. Although the NIS is the European security policy now that should be harmonized across every member country. And yes, so that, anyway, no more questions it appears, so I will leave it at that, and thank everybody for listening, and I hope, again, my email address is adam.palmer@fireeye.com. Please download some of the attachments that are free as of help to you, and I hope that I will hear from some of you individually and be happy to talk about some of your security policy concerns. Thank you and have a great day.